On this episode, we visit Frederick, Maryland. We meet the chair of the Pedestrian Bicycle Advisory Committee. Then we learn about the East Frederick Rising project. Finally, we talk with a blind pedestrian about her concerns. Stay tuned.
We're in Frederick, Maryland, talking with John Thomas, who's chair of the Pedestrian Bicycle Advisory Committee. What is the committee?
Morning, John. Well, the Pedestrian Bicycle Advisory Committee for the City of Frederick here basically talks to the mayor and the board of aldermen, and it advises about all things bicycling and walking for the city. So things that we've worked on over the years is working on enhancing the capital improvement program to add things like pedestrian safety improvements, on-street bicycle markings, wayfinding for biking and walking around the city, off-street shared use path type improvements, that type of thing. These days, some of the bigger focus areas we've been working on is helping advise the city staff and elected officials on updating the streets and roads design standards for the city. So to bring them up to date, to make sure that widths and design for those bicycle and pedestrian facilities are in place. We've also continued to support major bicycle and pedestrian capital improvements and asked the mayor and board for their support on those, and they've been really good over the years. We're working on a shared use path tunnel project to connect two of the major shared use paths. One, this Carroll Creek linear park and trail through our Baker Park to what's called the Rock Creek Trail on the other side of US 15. So right now there's two major trails in the city that have this major US 15 freeway as the big choke point, and you can't get through there. So we're going to have a grade separated underpass underneath the high-speed ramps to help connect those two trails. Going forward, this East Street corridor over here, we're hoping to add in the CIP program in the future more on-street improvements, more off-street improvements, more connections to the different generators along the way here. This Carroll Creek Park itself is going to be extended past the downtown MARC commuter rail and bus transit center further east towards our fairgrounds and East Patrick Street, and that'll really trigger a lot of development that's already been approved, but it's waiting for this linear park structure to be finished on that. And we've been fortunate to be able to get significant funding from federal and state sources like the Transportation Alternatives Program, which used to be called the Enhancements Program. So that helps pay a big chunk of that, with the locals providing that match to get these projects done.
And you mentioned development that's waiting for this path trail to get finished over there. How important are features like this to developers? Do they really value them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look behind us here, we've got residential development here. That's on one side. We've got commercial development on the other side. We've got public facilities and infrastructure. The major downtown library is right behind us here. This is a happening place. This is really important to take what at one point was just basically a flood control facility in the downtown that didn't have anything going on, and really turn it into a lively mixed-use center that people can live, work, and play and come out. It's become a tourism destination for people coming up to visit the city, and it's really a quality of life thing for here.
And you talked about revising your standards for streets and roads. How much can the city do, and how much do you have to deal with the county and their standards and the state and their standards?
Good question. Fortunately, in Frederick City, the county is somewhat out of the loop on things because it's the city will control the roads. We do have to work with Maryland State Highway a good bit. State Highway's been really good to work with. Within the last 10 years, they've really updated their standards to have the policy where the bicycle and pedestrian accommodations come when a major roadway project comes. So when we have whether it's a new roadway project right out here on East Street that connected down to Maryland 85, or whether it's a new interchange on the north side of the city, the state is really, not only is it policy, but they're willing to put in those sidewalks, to put in those on-street bicycle lanes, to put in those master plan shared use paths as part of their major projects. And it's a nice way to, include bicycle and pedestrian safety in those larger projects. close to 25% of the fatalities statewide from a highway perspective are bicycle pedestrian fatalities. So it's a low-cost way to add those bicycle and pedestrian improvements to get to improve safety around the region. And State Highway has been a big partner with Frederick City in getting those things done.
And you mentioned improving wayfinding. Is that wayfinding for tourists, wayfinding for people who live here? What's your concentration on the wayfinding?
All of the above. They did a really good job getting signage for all the major destinations, not only for people who live here to connect to parking, to connect to public facilities like the library, to connect out east to the airport and the train station. But when people come into town, they know where they're going. They know where to park. They know where things are. It's been a big effort, and it ties in not just on the streets, but also on the bicycle pedestrian facilities like the Carroll Creek Park here.
What are you doing with respect to children getting to school?
Great question. The biggest thing that we've worked on in the past few years is partnering with the county public schools to do some safe routes to school improvements. Some of that is as simple as going out into the schools and encouraging people and teaching the kids about bicycle safety, so whether it's through bicycle rodeos or handouts, that type of thing. There have been certainly some on-street physical improvements, so crossing at those schools, signage and marking, working with the local law enforcement folks to help enforce. The state law in Maryland is to actually stop at those crosswalks, at those signs crosswalks when pedestrians are present. Working with the law enforcement to enforce both sides of that, to enforce both the motorists stopping at those unsignalized mid-block type crosswalks, and also enforcing, especially in the downtown setting, enforcing the pedestrians not crossing against a signal. So the city police has really been a good partner in those type of efforts as well.
What is the sidewalk system like in the city of Frederick? Do most streets have sidewalks? You're missing a lot? What's the situation?
So sidewalk presence is actually pretty good. The challenge has been it's a historic downtown, so there's not a lot of room to improve sidewalks in many places. The city does have a program to go back and retrofit and improve ADA conditions and the widths and the clearance at the crossings to do that. But we do run into the challenge occasionally in that historic downtown where there's just not room to do things. Recently, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory worked to advise city staff on the updating of a sidewalk cafe ordinance. So what we looked at was spacing between the sidewalk cafes and the edge of the curb to get people through, so they have that space to get people through between the curb and between the face of the cafe or the face of the fronting street. But again, that's a big challenge when you, in a historic downtown that's built out, you can't move buildings. I mean, you need to maintain that character. We had the same challenges when we started putting bike racks in downtown to encourage folks to bike downtown. We have to get those approved to the Historic Preservation Commission and find the right spot so it's not interfering with the pedestrian movement along those sidewalks. We also partner with State Highway to do some sidewalk improvements there. So again, the sidewalk inventory itself is pretty good, but we still got a lot of work to do.
And how many of the issues does the committee come up with on their own, and does the city come to you with particular questions they have that they'd like you to look at and give input to?
It's a little bit of both. Our city transportation planner, Tim Davis, has been really good facilitating that staff committee. So he'll bring issues, whether it's reviewing developments, reviewing capital improvement programs. When we first, he'll bring those to us to review. When we first started, it was, hey, what do we want to do? Our big project was to get Frederick City designated as a bicycle-friendly community. And we did that within the first couple of years, getting the city designated from the League of American Bicyclists as a bronze designated community. We really want to get it up to the silver and the gold and the platinum and beyond, but that's a lot of work. And one of the interesting things about the bicycle-friendly community designation is it's gotten tougher over the years. So when we first started, when the committee started in 2010, the standards were strong, and we met those standards. Well, when we went and found out that we need to reapply, we found that the standards were a lot tougher. So, all of these bicycle type infrastructure improvements over the country, things have been modernized. People are doing lots of things, so they had to up their standards so they couldn't let everybody, everybody's a gold designated. Well, it's a lot tougher to get silver, gold, and platinum than it was 7 years ago. So a lot of the projects that the committee came up with were geared toward how can we become a more bike-friendly community. So that's where our first set of bike lanes in the city came. That's where our shared use markings, we have a whole shared use network around town. On the tourism and encouragement side, we created what's called the Frederick History Bicycle Loop, where folks, residents and visitors can come and visit some of the historic sites in the downtown on bike, and it's mapped out, and they can stop at a visitor center and get those maps. So those are the types of projects that the committee itself came up on. So it's a little bit of both. It's both staff-driven and the committee-driven.
And on the bicycle side, you have sort of the pressure trying to meet the LAB criteria to get to that higher level. What's the equivalent on the pedestrian side, since you don't have a similar association with bronze, silver, and gold for pedestrian facilities? What do you do there to keep going?
So there are people nationwide that have started to come up with pedestrian designations, but we didn't want to wait specifically for, hey, let's do this just to get pedestrian safety. So what we're really looking at is the crosswalks, the signage and markings, the making sure that the school crosswalks are signed and marked, that the sidewalks are in place, that there are connections between major linear park facilities and shared use paths like this, that the ADA upgrades are done where they need to be done. That's really been our focus on the pedestrian side. And obviously we partner a good bit with the private sector. A lot of these transportation type improvements and bike ped improvements come from redevelopment and development. So having good standards that let the private sector partners build this stuff has been a big part of the success in Frederick City.
And in the relatively short time the committee's been in existence, have the sort of issues you deal with been shifting over time? Do you see that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, some issues will have been taken care of and you'll be moving on to other ones?
Well, obviously our population and jobs have continued to grow, and they continue to grow. Frederick City has become a destination not just to live and commute down to the Washington, D.C. area, but also to live and work here. So, taking care of the city residents themselves and helping them get to work, helping them get to the library here, helping them get to schools. The focus has been a lot more on the residents. I mean, we still want people to come visit, but we want people to live here and work here as well. So, access improvements to the Mark Rail commuter station, to the buses, access and improvements to bus stops, making sure we worked with the TSAC group that I think you're aware of on transit-friendly design guidelines. So that type of thing. The nice thing about Frederick City is a lot of the schools, too, are close enough for kids to walk. So as our population grows, there's more demand for improvements for those kids biking and walking to elementary, middle, and high school.
We're talking with Alan Feinberg. What is East Frederick Rising?
East Frederick Rising is an amazing project because Frederick's blessed with 2,000 acres right next to an amazing downtown, which is very significant because most of that was industrial and even farming, and it's ready to be something else. And about 10 years ago, I started jawboning people about, this is a lot better than just doing warehousing or something dumb. So after a while, people started listening, and 5 years ago, we did a vision for the area, and it's had a big impact. In fact, one of the major developments that really is key got approved just in October, the Wren Farm for 200 acres, and it's going to be mixed use, and it's going to be pedestrian friendly, and it will relate quite well to downtown, particularly because it also has a huge park connected with it, larger than our existing Baker Park, which will have all kinds of opportunities for walking and biking and and nature. So the reason I think Frederick is so important because I grew up as an adult in Reston, and that was 50 years ago. And Reston and Columbia made a huge difference on the country because they're in the shadow of the capital. And what happened is that they were an open community, which was much different than the other suburban communities. So they welcomed all kinds of diversity. They welcomed all kinds of mixed-race families, and it has proven itself economically and socially to be hugely successful. And we have that same opportunity here, all except we have this historic context. There's a pattern of building here that goes back to the 1700s even, that we can use as a template for how the east side can be as good or better than downtown and the Baker Park neighborhoods, because we have this opportunity. We're shaping it now. We're using design standards, and hopefully we'll be building a pattern book quite soon. But we need to change the standard way of developing from doing huge projects that happen right away, that either get it right or wrong, usually wrong, and lead to boom or bust. And we have an opportunity to pick up the way that we built in the 17th, 18th, 19th century.
Now, who all was involved in creating this vision? Who did you bring into the process?
Well, the first person I went to was a guy named Ron Young, who was our four-term mayor, who really has made a huge difference in Frederick. I call what he did was the first Renaissance in Frederick, and that started in the 70s. He was responsible for what's happened to Carroll Creek, as you see. He did the downtown without, he undergrounded the wires. And anyway, I went to Ron first, and typically Ron is skeptical, and then I kept annoying him for about 1.5 years, and he jumped in, and he brought in a lot of people that have a lot of respect for him. People I used to call good old boys, now I call them deeply rooted old friends, and they've given it the kind of credibility. So we have, after 10 years, they've kind of gotten used to us, and now they're seeing the possibilities that, as a planner, I've traveled a lot, and I've seen a lot of places, and particularly the reason that my wife and I, who's also a planner, located here it was about as close to our experience of being in Germany as any place else. So we picked Frederick. I was living in D.C. and far Capitol Hill. She was in Greenbelt, which also had a big impact on the country 80 years ago. So we picked Frederick, and it wasn't quite what it is today, but the reason it is today is because people like me who know a little bit of stuff and know some people are good at annoying other folks about this is not good enough. In fact, planners should be very involved in making sure good enough is not good enough, that we keep pushing. And just like your last interview, the demonstration of grassroots, of people that are involved in this because they love the place, not particularly because they're making any money out of it, are key to all of this. And educating people about urbanism, about density, about connectivity, all these things really matter to a community. And you don't get that out of the back of the book or from trying just to follow the regs that are already on the books that are perhaps not relevant anymore.
So what's all this construction going on right behind us?
Well, Doug Jamal, Douglas Development, bought that property right behind us about 15 years ago. Just this last year, they got a tenant for it, so they're moving on it, and it's going to be an amazing project, mostly a huge part office for a software developer that's expanding, and also there'll be other aspects, commercial aspects of it. But this part of the creek is just being finished this year, or it'll be early next year. And then we move on to the east side of town, which is really dramatic because there's so much land there that is fallow ground, uses that are uses that will, because of the economics of it, will eventually realize that they can move out and for other uses. And there's a big project right beyond there at the White Building where Matin is going to be building a huge number of apartments. There are just all kinds of possibilities on that side of town because there's so much land next to downtown.
Where do pedestrians and walkability fit into all this?
Connectivity is key. For instance, the people that are really moving in here we're getting a huge number of people that are empty nesters, like I am, my wife and I. There are lots and lots of millennials moving in. They want to be able to do what I do, which is walk around town all day and rarely get in my car. And we only have one car. Finally, a number of years ago, we got rid of an extra vehicle, and it is just so much more human to be able to be where you want to be, stay healthy. Reason that I walk so much is I had a stroke some time ago, and I got a puppy dog and then 2 puppy dogs, and we've got to walk those puppies. And I can, even when I had the stroke, aside from not having a grocery store downtown, I have everything I needed here. And we'll get a grocery store soon enough also.
How long is this vision? How many years is it going to take to build out the area?
Look, I'm a planner. I've been doing this stuff for almost 50 years. It takes time, but some things happen faster than you even imagine, and things are happening now. But I had this vision over 15 years ago about what would happen on this side of town. I just wasn't in a position to do much about it because I was on salary somewhere or doing work trying to make a living, and now people ask me when I'm going to retire. I'm going to retire about 30 years after I die. There's just too much to do. You never know exactly how long things are going to take, but I look back at projects I did decades ago, and now they're coming to fruition. It's just part of the game. You can't expect things happen when they're supposed to happen, not when you want them to happen.
We're in the city of Frederick, Maryland, talking with Marion Horniak, who's a member of the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee.
Hello.
What sort of difficulties does a pedestrian with visual impairments have trying to get around Frederick City?
One of the challenges that visually impaired people have, especially if you walk with a cane like I do, is the uneven nature of the sidewalks. Our downtown area is very has been preserved historically to maintain the historic quality from many, many years ago. But unfortunately, because of that, our sidewalks are very uneven. The brick is raised up in some areas. There are cracks in the sidewalk. It's very difficult getting your cane caught in a crack. It's difficult to navigate, but at the same time, if you have a little bit of vision like I do and you can appreciate the beauty and the aesthetic nature of the sidewalks, you try to navigate around it and do the best you can.
And if a brick sidewalk is well maintained, so it's the bricks are nice and smooth, so you don't have some that have been shoved up by tree roots or by frost. Are brick sidewalks inherently a problem, or is it just the maintenance issues that create difficulties?
It's just a maintenance issue. Newer brick sidewalks are fine. They're very well laid. There's usually a very smooth transition between the brick and the pavement, and it's usually not an issue. It's as the years go on and the trees lift up the bricks and they're not properly maintained that it becomes an issue, and you get your cane tip caught in a crack and you end up stabbing yourself.
What are the issues do you run into, other issues you run into trying to get around the city?
Sometimes finding a bus stop is a little challenging. The bus stop, not every bus stop has a shelter, and I know that it is very expensive to have shelters, and it's not always convenient to have a shelter at each stop. But the bus stop signs are placed in whatever existing pole happens to be in that location, whether it's a utility pole, a light pole, a freestanding pole, and a lot of times it's difficult to determine just from feeling the pole if you are at the right bus stop or not. Other issues that I can't control is traffic. A lot of people are just so distracted nowadays that they just don't notice the person with the cane. They don't use a turn signal, or they're just driving too fast, or they're too distracted. So.
And if the state of Maryland decided they wanted to try to educate drivers on what they should be doing to, help out blind pedestrians get around, what sort of message would you like the state of Maryland to get out to drivers?
Just reminding people of the white cane law. Everybody learns about it when they get their driver's licenses and as teenagers, and they just tend to forget. They need a refresher to remind them that the person with the white cane has the right of way, and to just be patient and let us cross the street.
Are there particular issues you're working with on the advisory committee? Beyond the issues of people with disabilities navigating, are there other issues you're working on at the moment?
Our most recent issue has been the sidewalk cafe ordinances. People enjoy dining outside in downtown Frederick. It's such a pretty place to eat, such a nice place to be. But our sidewalk cafes were getting a little bit out of hand as far as taking up space in the sidewalk. It's very difficult to navigate with your cane, especially if the area is roped off. You can just walk into the rope and clothesline yourself. And there hasn't been a lot of space in the sidewalk, not just for the visually impaired, but for wheelchairs as well. So we are working with the Downtown Frederick Partnership and the city to come up with standards and an ordinance to make it standard for everyone, so that we can still dine outside and still make it accessible for the disabled.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.